The venom coursing through Diana's veins spelled death for every Romulan male, except for the human standing before her. Captain Benjamin Jenkins of the USS Horizon watched in horror as the two Romulan crewmen collapsed, their bodies convulsing before falling still. Yet he remained unaffected, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and fascination. "Stay back!" Diana cried, her emerald eyes wide with panic. "I'm toxic to my own kind. I never thought... How are you still alive?" Jenkins held up his hands, showing he meant no harm. The crashed Romulan ship loomed behind Diana, smoke still rising from its twisted hull. The uncharted planet's violet sky cast an eerie glow over the scene of destruction. "I'm Captain Benjamin Jenkins of the Earth vessel USS Horizon," he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. "We picked up your distress signal. What happened here?" Diana's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of her. "I'm part of a classified Romulan genetic engineering program. We were supposed to be the ultimate assassins, but something went terribly wrong." As Diana explained the catastrophic backfire of the program, Jenkins felt the weight of the situation settle on him. The Romulan Empire, once a formidable force in the galaxy, now teetered on the brink of extinction. Only a handful of males remained in stasis, a last-ditch effort to preserve their species. "We set out to find other races immune to the venom," Diana continued, her voice breaking. You might be our last hope." Jenkins' mind raced. Humanity now held the key to saving an entire alien race. The implications were staggering. They could gain a powerful ally or, if things went wrong, create a dangerous enemy. As he pondered their next move, Jenkins became acutely aware of a change in his body. Diana's pheromones, released along with the venom, began to affect him in ways he couldn't have anticipated. His pulse quickened, and he found it increasingly difficult to focus on anything but the striking Romulan woman before him. "We need to get you to our ship," Jenkins said, fighting to keep his voice level. "Our medical team can study your condition and perhaps find a way to neutralize the venom." Diana nodded, relief visible on her face. As Jenkins called for an emergency beam-out, he knew the real challenge was just beginning. The presence of a Romulan assassin on board the Horizon would test not only the crew's scientific capabilities, but also the very foundations of human-alien relations. As the transporter beam engulfed them, Jenkins caught one last glimpse of the desolate crash site. The bodies of his fallen crewmen served as a grim reminder of the deadly nature of their new passenger. Whatever came next, Jenkins knew that his decisions in the coming hours and days would shape the future of both humanity and the Romulan race. The familiar surroundings of the Horizon's transporter room materialized around them. Jenkins immediately ordered Diana to be escorted to a quarantine bay, acutely aware of the risk she posed to the male members of his crew. As he watched her being led away, he couldn't shake the feeling that her arrival marked the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything he thought he knew about interspecies, compatibility, and the role of humanity in the greater galaxy. As the transporter beam faded, Captain Jenkins found himself standing in the familiar surroundings of the Horizon's transporter room. The air crackled with tension as he turned to address his crew. "Medical team to Quarantine Bay 2, immediately," he ordered, his voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. "Lieutenant, escort our guests there now. Full containment protocols." Diana's emerald eyes met his, a mixture of fear and gratitude evident in her gaze as she was led away. Jenkins watched her go, acutely aware of the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. "Bridge to Captain Jenkins," his comm badge chirped. "Jenkins here." "Sir, we've detected a Romulan ship on long-range sensors. It appears to be disabled and adrift." Jenkins' brow furrowed. "Acknowledged. Maintain orbit around the planet and continue scans. I'll be on the bridge shortly." As he made his way through the corridors, Jenkins' mind raced with the implications of their discovery. The presence of a genetically engineered Romulan assassin on his ship was unprecedented, and the potential consequences were staggering. Upon reaching the bridge, he immediately opened a secure channel to Starfleet Command. Admiral Zhao's stern face appeared on the screen. "Captain Jenkins, report." Jenkins recounted the events on the planet's surface. careful to include every detail about Diana and the lethal effects of her venom on Romulan males. The Admiral's expression grew grave. "This is a sensitive situation, Captain. The diplomatic implications alone. Keep the Romulan woman in quarantine. I'm assembling a team of our top xenobiologists and diplomats. In the meantime, you're to remain in orbit and gather as much information as possible." "Understood, Admiral," Jenkins replied, ending the transmission. Over the next few days, the USS Horizon buzzed with activity. In the medical bay, Dr. Emily Harris worked tirelessly, analyzing samples of Diana's blood and tissue. "Fascinating," she muttered, peering into a microscope. "The genetic modifications are unlike anything I've ever seen." Captain Jenkins found himself drawn to the quarantine bay more often than strictly necessary. Each visit left him feeling energized, his senses sharper. He attributed it to the high-stakes nature of their mission, but a nagging doubt lingered in the back of his mind. During one such visit, Diana's voice broke through his thoughts. "Your ship, it's impressive. So different from Romulan vessels." Jenkins smiled, leaning against the transparent barrier separating them. "I'd be interested to hear more about Romulan ships, for purely scientific purposes, of course." Diana's laugh was melodious, sending an involuntary shiver down his spine. "Of course, Captain, though I suspect your true interest lies elsewhere." Before Jenkins could respond, his comm badge chirped urgently. "Captain, to the bridge! Immediately!" Arriving on the bridge, Jenkins was met with a tense atmosphere. On the interface, a massive Romulan warbird shimmered into view, its cloaking device deactivating. "They're hailing us, sir," the communications officer reported. "On screen," Jenkins ordered, straightening his uniform. A stern-faced Romulan woman appeared, her eyes cold and calculating. "I am Commander Tavala of the Imperial Warbird Shadowhawk. You are harboring a dangerous fugitive. Return her to us immediately or face the consequences." Jenkins' mind raced, weighing his options. The presence of a Romulan warbird complicated matters exponentially. He needed to buy time. "Commander Tavala, I'm Captain Benjamin Jenkins of the USS Horizon. We responded to a distress call and rescued a survivor. Under Federation law, we're obligated to offer assistance to those in need, regardless of species." Tavala's eyes narrowed. "This is not a matter for Federation law, Captain. The female you rescued is part of a classified Imperial project. Her presence on your ship poses a grave danger to your crew." As if to underscore Tavala's words, alarms blared through the ship. "Medical emergency in Quarantine Bay 2! Dr. Harris's voice crackled over the comm. Jenkins' heart raced as he realized the implications. Diana's pheromones were affecting his crew, just as they had affected him. The situation was spiraling out of control. "Commander, I assure you we have the situation well in hand," Jenkins lied smoothly. "Perhaps we can discuss this further. Surely there's a diplomatic solution that can benefit both our peoples." Tavala's expression remained impassive. "You have 1 hour to surrender the fugitive, Captain. After that, we will take her by force." The viewscreen went dark, leaving Jenkins staring at the looming shape of the Romulan warbird. "Shields up, red alert," he ordered, his mind already formulating a plan. "And get me Dr. Harris. We need answers, and we need them now." As the klaxon sounded and the ship's corridors bathed in red light, Jenkins couldn't shake the feeling that the next hour would determine not just his fate, but that of 2 species. With both human and Romulan lives hanging in the balance, he steeled himself for the challenges ahead, knowing that every decision he made could tip the scales between peace and interstellar war. Captain Jenkins paced the bridge, his mind racing as he considered their precarious situation. The looming Romulan warbird filled the viewscreen, a silent threat hanging over them. With less than an hour before Tavala's ultimatum expired, he knew he had to act decisively. "Lieutenant, hail the Romulan vessel," Jenkins ordered, his voice steady despite the tension thrumming through his body. "Channel open, sir," the communications officer responded. Jenkins squared his shoulders. "Commander Tavala, this is Captain Jenkins. I propose we meet face-to-face on the planet's surface to discuss this situation. Neutral ground for both parties." There was a moment of tense silence before Tavala's voice crackled through the comm. "Agreed, Captain, but I will bring a security detail." "Understood. We'll do the same. Jenkins out." He turned to his first officer. Commander Reeves, you're with me. Dr. Harris, I want you there too. We might need your medical expertise. As they prepared to beam down, Jenkins briefed his team. Remember, we're walking into a potentially volatile situation. Stay alert, but let's try to drive this diplomatically. The transporter beam shimmered around them, and moments later, they materialized in a clearing near Diana's crashed ship. The violet sky cast an otherworldly glow on the assembled group. T'Valla stood flanked by two Romulan guards, their expressions impassive, but their stance clearly defensive. Jenkins stepped forward, his hand extended in a gesture of peace. Commander T'Valla, thank you for agreeing to this meeting. T'Valla's eyes narrowed, ignoring the offered hand. Let's dispense with pleasantries, Captain. We want the female returned to us immediately. I understand your position, Jenkins began, choosing his words carefully. But surely we can find a solution that benefits both our peoples. Diana's condition is none of your concern, T'Valla snapped. The female is part of a classified Imperial project. Her presence on your ship is a violation of Romulan sovereignty. As the discussion intensified, Jenkins noticed a subtle change in the Romulan guards. Their postures stiffened, and a sheen of sweat appeared on their foreheads. He realized with a jolt that Diana's pheromones were affecting them, even at this distance. Commander, Jenkins said, trying to redirect the conversation, I think it's important we discuss the full implications of Diana's condition. It's clear that he was cut off by a sudden commotion. One of the Romulan guards let out a guttural cry, his eyes wild with a mixture of fear and rage. Before anyone could react, he lunged at T'Valla, tackling her to the ground. Reeves, Jenkins shouted, but his first officer was already moving, phaser drawn. In the chaos that followed, Jenkins found himself instinctively shielding Diana, who had been standing silently to the side. He felt her trembling against him, her breath coming in short gasps. The skirmish was over almost as quickly as it began. T'Valla had managed to subdue her crazed guard, but not before sustaining a deep gash across her midsection. She stumbled, her face contorted in pain. Dr. Harris, Jenkins called out. Without hesitation, the doctor rushed to T'Valla's side, medical tricorder already whirring. The wound is severe, Dr. Harris reported, her hands moving swiftly to staunch the blood flow. She needs immediate treatment. T'Valla's eyes widened in surprise at the human doctor's swift action to aid her. For a moment, the hardness in her expression softened. Jenkins saw an opportunity. Commander, let us help you. This situation has spiraled out of control, but I believe we can work together to find a solution. T'Valla grimaced, both from pain and reluctance. What do you propose, Captain? A joint research initiative, Jenkins said, his mind racing ahead. We pool our resources, our knowledge. We work together to find a cure for the Venom, with Diana's willing participation. This could save your species and forge a new era of cooperation between our peoples. The remaining Romulan guard, who had been watching the proceedings with growing uncertainty, spoke up. Commander, perhaps we should consider the humans' offer. Our options are limited. T'Valla's eyes darted between Jenkins, the guard, and Dr. Harris, who was still tending to her wound. Finally, she gave a curt nod. Very well, Captain. I will relay your proposal to the High Command. But know this, if you betray us, the consequences will be severe. As the groups prepared to return to their respective ships, Diana pulled Jenkins aside. Her emerald eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Thank you, Captain, for everything. I don't know how to express my gratitude. Jenkins felt a surge of emotion, intensified by his prolonged exposure to her pheromones. He struggled to maintain his composure. We'll find a way through this, Diana. I promise. Back on the USS Horizon, Jenkins found his crew divided. Dr. Harris was practically bouncing with excitement at the prospect of groundbreaking research, while Reeves remained skeptical, voicing concerns about Romulan trustworthiness. As Jenkins settled into his command chair, preparing to address his crew, an urgent communication from Starfleet Command flashed on his console. His eyes widened as he read the message, realizing that their situation had just become exponentially more complicated. Yellow alert, he ordered, his voice cutting through the bridge chatter. All senior staff to the briefing room immediately. Jenkins took a deep breath, steeling himself for the challenges ahead. The fate of two species now rested in his hands, and unknown alien forces were converging on their position. As he stood to head to the briefing room, he knew that every decision he made from this point forward would have far-reaching consequences. The true test of his leadership and humanity's place in the galactic community was about to begin. Jenkins entered the briefing room, his mind racing with the implications of the message from Starfleet Command. The senior staff sat around the table, their faces etched with concern and anticipation. "I've just received word that we're about to have company," Jenkins began, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "Multiple alien races are converging on our position. We need to prepare for all contingencies." He turned to his tactical officer. "Lieutenant Vance, I want you to establish a defensive perimeter around the planet. We'll maintain our position, but be ready for anything." Vance nodded sharply. "Aye, sir. I'll reconfigure our shield harmonics to better withstand potential attacks from multiple vectors." "Dr. Harris," Jenkins continued, "what's the status of your research on Diana's condition?" The doctor's eyes lit up with excitement. "Captain, I've made a fascinating discovery. Your prolonged exposure to Diana's pheromones has resulted in some unexpected changes to your physiology. It seems there's a unique symbiosis occurring between human and Romulan biochemistry." Jenkins felt a jolt of surprise. He had noticed feeling different lately, sharper, more alert, physically stronger, but had attributed it to the high-stress situation. "What kind of changes are we talking about, Doctor?" "Enhanced sensory perception is increased strength and stamina, faster reflexes," Harris explained. "But more importantly, your DNA might hold the key to developing a cure for the Romulan males affected by Diana's venom." The implications of this revelation hung heavy in the air. Before Jenkins could respond, the ship's sensors blared an alert. "Captain," the communications officer's voice came over the intercom, "we're being hailed by an incoming Klingon battlecruiser." Jenkins straightened his uniform. On screen, the view screen flickered to life, revealing the fierce visage of a Klingon captain. "I am Captain Korg of the IKS Sword of Kahless. We demand you turn over the Romulan female and her venom immediately." Jenkins stood his ground. "I'm afraid I can't do that, Captain Korg. Diana is under our protection, and we have no intention of using her condition as a weapon." Korg's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You risk war with the Klingon Empire, human." Before Jenkins could respond, another alert sounded. A Vulcan science vessel dropped out of warp, followed closely by a massive Ferengi trading ship. The situation was escalating rapidly. Jenkins knew he needed to act fast to prevent potential interstellar conflict. "Captain Korg, I propose we discuss this matter further. We have other interested parties arriving. Perhaps we can find a solution that benefits all." As Jenkins worked to manage the delicate diplomatic balance, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off among his crew. Lieutenant Commander Reeves, usually his most trusted advisor, had been uncharacteristically quiet during the briefing. Unknown to Jenkins, Reeves was at that moment meeting with a group of like-minded crew members in a secluded part of the ship. "We can't trust the captain's judgment," Reeves said in a hushed tone. "He's been compromised by prolonged exposure to the Romulan woman. We need to take matters into our own hands." Back on the bridge, Jenkins found himself face-to-face with not only Korg, but also the Vulcan commander Talar and the Ferengi Daemon Brack. Each had their own agenda, and Jenkins felt like he was walking a tightrope. "Gentlemen and lady," Jenkins addressed the assembled alien leaders, "I understand you all have a vested interest in Diana and her condition, but I must emphasize that she is not a commodity to be traded or a weapon to be exploited." Talar raised an eyebrow. "Captain, surely you see the scientific value in studying this unique biological phenomenon? The Vulcan Science Academy would be more than willing to lead a joint research initiative." Daemon Brack's eyes gleamed with avarice. "Research? Bah, there's no profit in that. Now, if you were to grant me exclusive rights to distribute the venom and its cure, I could make it worth your while." As the negotiations grew heated, Jenkins felt a familiar presence at his side. Diana had entered the bridge, her emerald eyes filled with commitment. "Captain," she whispered, "I have a proposal, one that might help sway the negotiations in our favor. Jenkins leaned in, acutely aware of her proximity and the effect it was having on him. "I'm listening." "My pheromones," Diana explained. "We could use them strategically to influence the alien representatives. It's risky, but it might give us the edge we need." Before Jenkins could consider this morally ambiguous plan, the ship's sensors erupted in a cacophony of alarms. A massive energy signature was detected entering the system. "Sir," the tactical officer called out, his voice tight with tension, "multiple Romulan warbirds decloaking off our port bow." Jenkins watched as the viewscreen filled with the menacing shapes of a Romulan battle fleet. The already precarious situation had just become infinitely more complex. As he stood on the bridge, surrounded by representatives of 4 major galactic powers, with a potential mutiny brewing among his crew and his own body, undergoing unprecedented changes, Jenkins knew that his next decisions would shape the future of not just his ship, but potentially the entire quadrant. The true test of his leadership was about to begin. The massive Romulan warbirds dominated the viewscreen, their sleek, predatory forms casting long shadows across the stars. Jenkins felt his heart racing, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily on him. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, voice tight with tension, "I'm reading multiple weapon systems powering up across the Romulan fleet." Jenkins took a deep breath, his mind racing through possibilities. He knew he had to act fast to prevent an all-out war. "Open a channel to the lead Romulan vessel," he ordered. The viewscreen flickered, revealing the stern visage of Admiral Valeris. Her sharp features were set in a mask of cold grit. "Captain Jenkins," she said, her voice carrying an edge of steel, "I am Admiral Valeris of the Romulan Star Empire. You will surrender the female and all related research immediately or face the consequences." Jenkins stood tall, meeting her gaze. "Admiral, I propose we discuss this matter further. The situation is far more complex than it appears. I invite you, along with representatives from the other factions present, to a summit aboard the USS Horizon. We can find a solution that benefits all parties involved." Valeris's eyes narrowed, considering his words. After a tense moment, she nodded curtly. "Very well, Captain, but be warned. Any sign of deception, and we will not hesitate to use force." As the communication ended, Jenkins turned to his crew. "Prepare for the arrival of our guests. Security protocols at maximum." While his crew scrambled to make preparations, Jenkins pulled Dr. Harris aside. "Doctor, I need you to continue your research. Find a way to neutralize the Venom's effects. We're running out of time." Harris nodded, her eyes bright with perseverance. "I'm on it, Captain. But there's something you should know. Your prolonged exposure to Diana's pheromones, it's causing unprecedented changes in your physiology. Your body is starting to produce its own version of the Romulan pheromones." Jenkins felt a jolt of surprise. "What does this mean, Doctor?" "It means you could potentially influence the delegates yourself," Harris explained, "but it also means your judgment might be affected. Be careful, Captain." As Jenkins processed this information, he noticed Lieutenant Commander Reeves slipping away from the bridge. Something in Reeves's posture set off alarm bells in Jenkins' mind. "Computer, locate Diana," Jenkins ordered. "Diana is in Cargo Bay 3, the computer responded. Jenkins's enhanced senses tingled with suspicion. He made his way to the cargo bay, his newly heightened reflexes allowing him to move swiftly and silently through the ship's corridors. As he approached, he heard muffled voices. He pressed his ear to the door, his enhanced hearing picking up Reeves's hushed tones. "We can't let the captain hand her over to the Romulans," Reeves was saying. "We need to keep her secure until we can figure out a way to use her condition to Earth's advantage." Jenkins burst into the room, catching Reeves and a group of crewmen off guard. Diana stood in the center, her emerald eyes wide with fear and confusion. "Stand down, Commander," Jenkins ordered, his voice carrying an unnatural authority that made even Reeves flinch. "Captain, you don't understand," Reeves began, but Jenkins cut him off. "I understand perfectly. You're relieved of duty, Commander. Report to the brig." As security officers led Reeves and his co-conspirators away, Jenkins approached Diana. "Are you all right?" he asked, his concern evident in his voice. Diana nodded, her eyes searching his face. "Captain, your scent, it's changed. What's happening to you?" Before Jenkins could respond, the ship's computer announced the arrival of the first delegates. The summit was about to begin. In the conference room, representatives from each faction gathered around the large table. The air was thick with tension as Jenkins took his place at the head of the table. "Welcome," he began, his enhanced senses picking up on the subtle shifts in posture and scent from each delegate. "We're here to find a peaceful resolution to this crisis." Admiral Valeris leaned forward, her eyes boring into Jenkins. "The only resolution is the immediate return of the female and all research related to the Venom." Klingon Captain Korg hit his fist on the table. "The Venom's military applications cannot be ignored. The Klingon Empire demands access to this biological weapon." Vulcan Commander Talar raised an eyebrow. "A purely scientific approach would be the most logical course of action. The Vulcan Science Academy is prepared to lead an unbiased research initiative." As the debate heated up, Jenkins found himself struggling to control his own emotions. His newly developed pheromones were reacting to the heightened tension in the room, making it difficult for him to maintain his composure. Suddenly, the conference room doors slid open, revealing Diana. She strode in, her presence immediately capturing the attention of every delegate. "I will not be a pawn in your political games," she declared, her voice strong and clear. "My condition is not a weapon to be exploited or a commodity to be traded. It's a part of who I am, and I demand the right to decide my own fate." The room erupted into chaos as the delegates reacted to Diana's sudden appearance. Jenkins felt a surge of admiration for her courage, mixed with a growing awareness of the effect her pheromones were having on everyone present. As he prepared to address the gathered delegates, Jenkins knew that his next words would shape the future of not just this crisis, but potentially the entire quadrant. The summit on the USS Horizon had become the focal point of a pivotal moment in galactic history, and the weight of that responsibility pressed heavily on his shoulders. He took a deep breath, preparing to address the volatile gathering of intergalactic representatives. Suddenly, the conference room doors slid open with a hiss. All heads turned as Diana strode in, her emerald eyes blazing with persistence. The effect was instantaneous. The room erupted into chaos as delegates leapt to their feet, shouting and gesticulating wildly. Admiral Valeris, her face contorted with a mix of triumph and rage, lunged forward. "Seize her!" she barked at her guards. "The female belongs to the Romulan Empire." Captain Korg, not to be outdone, roared and shoved his way past the Vulcan delegation. "No! The Klingon Empire claims this prize!" In the ensuing melee, Diana stumbled backwards, her breathing quickening. As the aggressive delegates closed in, a shimmering cloud of pheromones billowed from her skin, filling the air with an intoxicating scent. The effect on the room was immediate and intense. Korg's eyes glazed over, and with a primal growl, he turned on the Romulan guards. The Klingon's massive fists connected with Romulan jaws, sending bodies flying across the conference table. Daimon Brack, the Ferengi representative, scrambled over chairs, his eyes wild with a mix of desire and avarice. "Capture her!" he shrieked to his guards. "Imagine the profit!" Even the Vulcan delegation showed signs of strain. Talar's usual stoic expression cracked, a bead of sweat forming on her brow as she gripped the edge of the table, nuchals tightening with the effort of maintaining control. Jenkins, his enhanced physiology rendering him immune to the pheromones' effects, surveyed the room in horror. He vaulted over the table, using his newly acquired agility to dodge flailing limbs and flying debris. "Diana," he called out, reaching for her hand. "We need to get out of here." Together, they fought their way through the chaos. Jenkins used his enhanced strength to push aside the grappling delegates, clearing a path to the door. As they crossed the threshold, he pounded his fist on the control panel, sealing the room behind them. The ship's corridors echoed with the sound of alarms as Jenkins and Diana raced towards the medical bay. Crew members rushed past them, responding to the crisis unfolding throughout the ship. They burst into the medical bay, startling Dr. Harris, who was hunched over a console filled with scrolling data. "Captain," Harris exclaimed, her eyes widening at their disheveled appearance. What's happening? Jenkins quickly explained the situation as Diana caught her breath beside him. Harris nodded grimly, her fingers flying over the console. I've finalized the procedure, she said, gesturing to a waiting biobed. It's risky, but it might be our only chance to neutralize the Venom's lethal effects while retaining its enhancements. Jenkins glanced at Diana, then back at the doctor. Do it, he said, climbing onto the biobed. As Harris began the treatment, Diana stepped closer, her hand finding Jenkins. The captain winced as the first wave of modified DNA flooded his system. Suddenly, the ship rocked violently. Jenkins' comm badge crackled to life with a frantic voice from the bridge. Captain, Lieutenant Commander Reeves and his supporters are attempting to take control of the ship. Before Jenkins could respond, his body convulsed. He gripped Diana's hand tighter as waves of pain washed over him. Through gritted teeth, he managed to ask, Status of the alien ships? The bridge officer's voice was tight with tension. The Romulan fleet is powering up weapons, sir. They're preparing to attack. Jenkins' vision blurred as Dr. Harris worked feverishly at the controls. Diana leaned in close, her voice a soothing whisper in his ear. Stay with me, Captain. We need you. As the ship shuddered under the first volley of Romulan fire, Jenkins felt a strange sensation building within him. A warmth spread from his core, racing through his veins. His skin began to tingle, and a faint shimmering mist rose from his body. Dr. Harris gasped, staring at her readings. Captain, your body is producing a new type of pheromone. It's nothing I've ever seen before. The mist grew denser, swirling around Jenkins before being sucked into the ship's ventilation system. Within moments, the alarms throughout the ship fell silent. Jenkins sat up, his head clearing. He felt different, stronger, more focused. Diana stared at him in awe, her emerald eyes wide with wonder. What's happening? Jenkins asked, his voice steady despite the incredible sensations coursing through his body. Before Dr. Harris could answer, the comm system crackled to life once more. This time it was Reeves's voice that filled the medical bay. Captain, Reeves said, his tone oddly calm, I don't know how to explain this, but the fighting has stopped. Everyone on the bridge, including myself, we've regained our senses. It's as if a fog has lifted. Jenkins exchanged a look with Diana and Dr. Harris. And the alien ships? There was a pause before Reeves replied. Sir, you're not going to believe this, but they're standing down, all of them. We're receiving reports of a strange sensation of peace sweeping through their crews. As the implications of this development began to sink in, Jenkins realized that his transformation had done more than just save him from the Venom's effects. He had become something new, a potential key to interspecies peace. Diana squeezed his hand, her voice filled with a mixture of awe and hope. Captain, I think you might have just changed everything. Jenkins nodded slowly, the weight of this new responsibility settling on his shoulders. As he prepared to leave the medical bay and face the aftermath of the crisis, he knew that the greatest challenges and opportunity still lay ahead. The weight of his newfound abilities and the potential to reshape galactic politics pressed heavily on Jenkins's mind as he stepped off the biobed. Captain, Dr. Harris said, her voice filled with urgency, we need to conduct a thorough examination to understand the full extent of your transformation. Jenkins nodded, his senses still reeling from the changes coursing through his body. Agreed, Doctor. But first, we need to address the situation on the bridge and with our guests. As they made their way through the corridors, Jenkins noticed the gradual dissipation of the pacifying pheromones. Crew members who had moments ago been in a state of calm focus were now shaking their heads, their expressions a mix of confusion and concern. Upon entering the bridge, Jenkins found himself face to face with Lieutenant Commander Reeves. The man's earlier hostility had vanished, replaced by a look of bewilderment. Captain, Reeves began, his voice hesitant, I don't know what came over me. My actions were inexcusable. Jenkins held up a hand. We'll discuss that later, Commander. Right now, we need to focus on the delegates. What's their status? The tactical officer spoke up. Sir, the alien ships have powered down their weapons. We're receiving hails from all parties requesting to reconvene the summit. Jenkins exchanged a glance with Diana, who had remained close by his side. Her emerald eyes held a mixture of hope and apprehension. Very well, he said. Have them gather in the main conference room in 1 hour. We need time to prepare. As the bridge crew rushed to comply with his orders, Jenkins felt a sudden wave of dizziness. Diana steadied him, her touch sending a jolt of electricity through his skin. Captain, Dr. Harris interjected, we really should begin those tests now. Your body is still adjusting to the changes. Jenkins nodded, allowing himself to be led back to sickbay. Over the next hour, he underwent a battery of scans and tests, each revealing more about his altered physiology. It's remarkable, Dr. Harris muttered, poring over the results. Your DNA has been fundamentally altered. You're not just immune to Diana's venom. You've developed the ability to produce and control an entirely new type of pheromone. Diana, who had insisted on staying for the examination, leaned in closer. What does this mean for him? For us? Before Dr. Harris could respond, the ship's computer announced the arrival of the delegates in the conference room. Jenkins stood, straightening his uniform. We'll have to continue this later, Doctor. Right now we have a potential interstellar incident to prevent. As they approached the conference room, Jenkins could hear the raised voices of the delegates through the closed doors. Taking a deep breath, he entered, Diana close behind him. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to them. Admiral Valeris of the Romulan fleet was the first to speak, her voice carefully controlled. Captain Jenkins, I believe we find ourselves in a unique situation. Jenkins nodded, taking his place at the head of the table. Indeed we do, Admiral. I propose we use this opportunity to find a peaceful resolution that benefits all parties involved. Over the next few hours, the negotiations unfolded in a manner Jenkins could never have anticipated. Admiral Valeris, recognizing the potential salvation for her species, proposed a joint human-Romulan research initiative. The Vulcans, represented by the ever-logical Talar, offered their scientific expertise. Even the Klingons, after initial resistance, saw the strategic advantage in participating. Captain Korg, his earlier aggression tempered, grudgingly agreed to contribute Klingon resources to the project. As the discussions progressed, Jenkins found himself increasingly aware of Diana's presence beside him. Their eyes met frequently, an unspoken understanding passing between them. In the brief moments between debates, they conferred in hushed tones, their heads close together. The negotiations were interrupted by an urgent comm from the bridge. Captain, the tactical officer's voice crackled through the speakers. We're detecting multiple incoming ships, Cardassian, Tholian, and... Sir, we're picking up a Breen signal. The room erupted into a flurry of activity as the delegates processed this new development. Jenkins raised his hands, calling for calm. This situation has clearly grown beyond our initial expectations. We need to present a united front. As he spoke, Jenkins felt a familiar warmth spreading through his body. The air around him shimmered faintly, and he realized he was unconsciously producing the pacifying pheromone. He took a deep breath, willing himself to control the emission. The effect on the room was subtle but noticeable. The delegates' postures relaxed slightly, their tones becoming more measured as they discussed how to approach the new arrivals. Suddenly, the ship's red alert klaxon blared. The tactical officer's voice, now permeated with panic, came through the comm. Captain, long-range sensors have detected a massive energy signature approaching at high warp. Sir, it matches the profile of a Borg cube. The conference room fell deathly silent. Jenkins felt the weight of every eye upon him, the fate of not just his crew, but potentially multiple species hanging in the balance. He knew the decisions he made in the next few moments would shape the future of the quadrant. Taking a steadying breath, Jenkins prepared to address the gathered delegates and ship captains. As he opened his mouth to speak, he felt Diana's hand slip into his, her touch grounding him in the chaotic moment. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. We face a threat that none of us can afford to ignore. The time has come for us to set aside our differences and work together. The question is, are we prepared to make that leap? As Jenkins surveyed the room, he saw a mix of fear, dedication, and calculation in the eyes of the assembled aliens. The true test of his leadership and humanity's place in the galactic community was about to begin. The tension in the room was palpable as Jenkins finished speaking, his words hanging in the air like a challenge to the assembled delegates. Admiral Valeris was the first to break the silence. "Captain, your proposal is intriguing. But how do you suggest we coordinate our efforts against such a formidable enemy?" Jenkins felt Diana's hand tighten around his, drawing strength from her presence. He took a deep breath, feeling the familiar warmth spreading through his body as he unconsciously released a subtle wave of his pacifying pheromones. "We form a joint task force," Jenkins said, his voice steady and clear. "Each of our species has unique strengths. Together, we stand a chance against the Borg." As he spoke, Jenkins noticed the delegates' postures relaxing slightly, their expressions shifting from suspicion to thoughtful consideration. Even Captain Korg, the Klingon representative, seemed less antagonistic than before. "The Romulan Empire can offer our advanced cloaking technology," Admiral Valeris said, her voice measured but tinged with a newfound willingness to cooperate. Captain Korg leaned forward, his ridged forehead creasing. "Klingon weapons are unmatched in the quadrant. We will contribute our firepower to this alliance." One by one, the delegates offered their species' strengths. The Vulcans pledged their scientific expertise, while the Ferengi, surprisingly, volunteered their vast information networks. As the discussions continued, Jenkins felt a wave of dizziness wash over him. He steadied himself against the conference table, drawing concerned looks from Diana and Dr. Harris. "Captain," Dr. Harris whispered, "we need to run more tests. Your body is still adjusting to these changes." Jenkins nodded, turning to address the delegates. "We'll reconvene in 1 hour to finalize our strategy. In the meantime, please coordinate with your ships and prepare for potential Borg contact." As the delegates filed out, Jenkins allowed Dr. Harris and Diana to guide him back to sickbay. The corridors of the USS Horizon buzzed with activity as crew members rushed to battle stations. In sickbay, Jenkins underwent another series of scans while Dr. Harris analyzed the results. Diana paced nearby, her emerald eyes filled with concern. "Fascinating," Dr. Harris muttered, studying the readouts. "Captain, it appears you can modulate the frequency and intensity of your pheromone production. With practice, you might be able to induce varying emotional responses in others." Jenkins raised an eyebrow. "You mean I could potentially influence the Borg?" Before Dr. Harris could respond, the ship's red alert klaxon blared. The tactical officer's voice came through the comm system. "Captain, to the bridge. The Borg cube has entered the system." Jenkins leapt from the biobed, his earlier fatigue forgotten in the rush of adrenaline. He, Diana, and Dr. Harris raced to the bridge, arriving just as the massive form of the Borg cube appeared on the interface. The sight sent a chill through the bridge crew. Jenkins stepped forward, his presence immediately steadying those around him. "Open a channel to the Allied fleet," he ordered. As the comm officer complied, Jenkins closed his eyes, concentrating on projecting a wave of courage and dedication. He felt the warmth spread from his core, enveloping the bridge and radiating out to the other ships. The Borg cube's chilling message echoed through the bridge. "We are the Borg. Lower your shields and surrender your ships. We will add your biological and technological distinctiveness to our own. Your culture will adapt to service us. Resistance is futile." Jenkins opened his eyes, his gaze fixed on the looming cube. "This is Captain Jenkins of the USS Horizon. We stand united against your threat. We will not surrender." He turned to Diana and Dr. Harris. "I have an idea, but it's risky. Is there a way to incorporate my pheromones into a communication signal?" Dr. Harris's eyes widened. "Theoretically, yes. We could modify a transmitter to carry the molecular structure of your pheromones as part of the signal." "Do it," Jenkins ordered, "and quickly." As Dr. Harris rushed to make the modifications, Jenkins addressed the Allied fleet. "All ships, hold your positions. Be prepared to attack on my command, but do not engage until I give the order." Minutes ticked by as Dr. Harris worked feverishly on the modified transmitter. The Borg cube loomed ever closer, its weapon systems powering up. Finally, Dr. Harris handed Jenkins the device. "It's ready, Captain. but we have no way of knowing how the Borg will react. Jenkins nodded grimly. It's a risk we have to take. He activated the transmitter, focusing all his concentration on projecting his pacifying pheromones through the signal. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, almost imperceptibly, the Borg cube's advance slowed. Its movements became less coordinated, as if the collective was suddenly unsure of itself. "Now," Jenkins shouted. "All ships, attack!" The Allied fleet sprang into action. Romulan ships, cloaked and undetectable, materialized briefly to deliver precision strikes before vanishing again. Klingon warships unleashed furious barrages of photon torpedoes, while Vulcan vessels targeted the cube's propulsion systems with surgical accuracy. As the battle raged, Jenkins felt Diana's hand on his shoulder. "It's working," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. But their momentary advantage was short-lived. The Borg, adapting to the unexpected assault, began to return fire. The USS Horizon shuddered under a direct hit, consoles exploding in showers of sparks. "Shields down to 60%, the tactical officer reported. Jenkins gripped the arms of his chair, his mind racing. They had struck a blow against the Borg, but it wasn't enough. They needed something more, something the collective couldn't adapt to. As if in answer to his thoughts, Dr. Harris's voice cut through the chaos of the bridge. "Captain, I have a theory about your DNA. If we could somehow introduce it directly into the Borg systems..." Jenkins met Diana's eyes, seeing his own realization mirrored there. It was a desperate plan, but it might be their only chance. "Prepare a boarding party," Jenkins ordered, his voice tight with grit. "Diana and I are going to pay the Borg a personal visit." "Visit?" He turned to his chief of security. "Lieutenant, assemble a team and meet us in the transporter room." As they hurried through the corridors, Diana pulled Jenkins aside. "Are you sure about this? It's incredibly risky." Jenkins met her gaze, his eyes filled with willpower. "We don't have a choice. It's our best shot at stopping the Borg." Moments later, they materialized aboard the Borg cube. The stark contrast between the sleek Federation starship and the Borg vessel was immediately apparent. Jenkins and Diana found themselves in a vast, dimly lit chamber, the air thick with the hum of machinery and the eerie silence of the collective consciousness. Jenkins didn't hesitate. He closed his eyes, concentrating intensely, and began to emit his pacifying pheromones at maximum intensity. The effect was almost immediate. Nearby drones, previously moving with robotic precision, began to falter. Some disconnected from their alcoves, their movements becoming erratic and uncoordinated. Diana, her Romulan training kicking in, quickly assessed their surroundings. Her keen eyes spotted a central node in the distance, pulsing with energy. "There," she whispered, pointing. "That appears to be coordinating the cube's functions. We should head there." They moved cautiously through the labyrinthine structure, avoiding the attention of the increasingly disoriented drones. As they progressed deeper into the cube, Jenkins' pheromones continued to disrupt the Borg's hive mind. More and more drones showed signs of individual awareness, their cybernetic implants twitching as if in conflict with their organic components. Back on the USS Horizon, Dr. Harris monitored Jenkins' vital signs and pheromone output through a specially designed subspace link. Her eyes widened as she observed the data streaming across her console. "Fascinating," she muttered. "The interaction between Jenkins' transformed DNA and the Borg's cybernetic implants is having an unexpected effect. The pacifying influence is spreading through their neural network at an exponential rate." Outside, the Allied fleet seized the opportunity presented by the Borg cube's erratic behavior. Romulan warbirds decloaked to deliver precise strikes, their disruptors carving glowing gashes in the cube's armor. Klingon battlecruisers unleashed furious barrages of photon torpedoes, while Vulcan ships targeted the cube's propulsion and weapon systems with surgical accuracy. As Jenkins and Diana approached the central node, they encountered a group of elite Borg drones. These cybernetic warriors seemed immune to the pacifying effect, their eyes focused and determined behind their ocular implants. Without warning, the drones attacked. Jenkins found himself relying on his enhanced strength and reflexes, dodging energy beams and deflecting blows that would have crushed an ordinary human. Diana moved with lethal grace, her assassin training coming to the fore. She struck with precision, targeting weak points in the drone's armor and incapacitating them with swift, efficient moves. During the fierce hand-to-hand combat, a drone's blade sliced deep into Jenkins' side. He stumbled, gasping in pain. The injury caused his pheromone production to spike uncontrollably. A wave of the pacifying chemical overwhelmed the remaining resistant drones, causing them to stagger and fall. The pheromone surge cascaded through the entire cube's systems. Deep within a hidden chamber, the Borg Queen became aware of the threat. Her face contorted in a mixture of rage and fear as she realized the danger to her collective. With a thought, she attempted to sever the affected drones from the hive mind, but the influence had spread too far, too fast. As the Queen fought to maintain control, the cube's defenses began to falter. The Allied fleet pressed its advantage, concentrating fire on the weakened sections of the massive vessel. Explosions rocked the cube's interior, and systems began to fail across the structure. Jenkins, despite his injury, pushed forward with Diana's help. They reached the central node, a towering pillar of pulsing light and twisting metal. Diana's expertise in Romulan technology proved crucial as she worked to interface with the alien systems. "We need to adapt your pheromones into a data stream," Diana explained, her fingers flying over the unfamiliar controls. "If we can transmit it throughout the entire Borg collective, we might be able to disrupt their control on a massive scale." As they worked feverishly, alarms began to blare throughout the structure. The Queen, in a last-ditch effort to stop them, had initiated the cube's self-destruct sequence. She was willing to sacrifice this vessel to prevent the disruption from spreading to the rest of the collective. A countdown echoed through the chamber, adding urgency to their task. Jenkins, fighting through the pain of his wound, focused all his concentration on maintaining a steady stream of pheromones, while Diana worked to integrate them into the Borg subspace network. With seconds to spare, Diana made the final connection. "Now!" she shouted. Jenkins released a massive burst of pheromones, which Diana immediately channeled into the data stream. The effect was immediate and far-reaching. Across the galaxy, Borg cubes began to falter as individual drones awakened from their collective stupor. As the self-destruct sequence reached its final moments, the chamber around them began to break apart. Jenkins, using the last of his strength, moved to shield Diana with his body. Their eyes met in this intense moment, a profound connection passing between them that transcended their biological differences in the chaos surrounding them. Just as the cube began to disintegrate, the familiar tingle of a transporter beam enveloped them. They materialized on the pad of the USS Horizon, battered and exhausted but alive. Medical teams rushed forward as Jenkins collapsed, his body finally giving in to the strain of the past hours. As he faded into unconsciousness, Jenkins heard the excited voices of the bridge crew reporting the Borg's disarray. He felt Diana's hand in his, anchoring him to consciousness, and then everything went dark. In sickbay, Dr. Harris worked feverishly to stabilize Jenkins' condition. As she examined his readings, her eyes widened in surprise. The long-term effects of his transformation were becoming apparent, and the implications were staggering. This discovery would have far-reaching consequences for Jenkins, Diana, and the future of human-alien relations. As the immediate crisis passed and the Allied fleet regrouped, the leaders of the various species found themselves united by their shared victory. The fall of the Borg and the newfound cooperation between former rivals heralded the potential for a new era of peace in the galaxy. But as Jenkins lay unconscious, his fate uncertain, it was clear that significant challenges lay ahead. The journey that had begun with a simple diplomatic mission had transformed into something far greater, with consequences that would reshape the future of the entire quadrant. As Jenkins lay unconscious in sickbay, Dr. Harris's eyes widened at the readings on her medical tricorder. She turned to Diana, who stood vigil at Jenkins' bedside. "His cellular structure is evolving," Dr. Harris said, her voice a mix of awe and concern. "It's as if his DNA is rewriting itself, incorporating elements of both human and Romulan genetics." Diana's brow furrowed. "What does that mean for him?" Before Dr. Harris could respond, Jenkins stirred, his eyes fluttering open. He winced, reaching for his side where the Borg drone had wounded him. "Captain, don't move," Dr. Harris instructed, running a medical scanner over his body. Your injury, it's healing at an unprecedented rate. Jenkins looked down, surprise etching his features as he saw the wound knitting itself closed. How is this possible? It seems your transformation has granted you enhanced regenerative abilities, Dr. Harris explained. And that's not all. Your DNA has undergone significant changes, granting you immunity to Diana's venom and potentially other abilities we've yet to discover. The news spread quickly through the Allied fleet. Within hours, the USS Horizon's briefing room was filled with representatives from various species, all eager to discuss the implications of Jenkins' unique condition. A Vulcan scientist, T'Pel, spoke first. Captain Jenkins' DNA could hold the key to revolutionary medical treatments. We propose a comprehensive study of his genetic makeup. Krug, a Klingon commander, leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. The warrior potential of such abilities cannot be ignored. We request permission to assess his combat capabilities. As the discussion continued, Diana slipped out of the room, her mind whirling. She found herself in a quiet corridor, trying to process her conflicting emotions. Dr. Harris found her there, concern evident in her eyes. Diana, are you all right? Diana turned, her usual composure slipping. I don't know. My feelings for Jenkins have grown deeper than I expected, but now... She trailed off, struggling to find the words. You're worried about what these changes mean for your future together, Dr. Harris finished gently. Diana nodded, grateful for the doctor's understanding. His physiology is changing so rapidly. What if he becomes something unrecognizable? Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication from the bridge. Dr. Harris, Ambassador Diana, please report to the main conference room immediately. They arrived to find the room buzzing with activity. Admiral Zhao of the Federation addressed the gathered leaders. We're receiving reports from across the quadrant. The collapse of the Borg collective has left countless drones struggling to regain their individuality. We're facing a humanitarian crisis on an unprecedented scale. Jenkins, looking pale but determined, entered the room. Despite Dr. Harris's protests, he took his place at the head of the table. We need to establish rehabilitation centers throughout the quadrant, he said, his voice strong despite his recent ordeal. These people need our help to reintegrate into their societies. The Allied leaders nodded in agreement, and plans were quickly drawn up for a joint task force. Jenkins' ability to produce pacifying pheromones was seen as a crucial asset in managing potentially volatile situations with traumatized ex-Borg. As the meeting concluded, a young ensign burst into the room. Sir, long-range sensors have detected unusual activity near the Romulan neutral zone. A group of rogue Romulan warbirds is attacking our fledgling rehabilitation centers. The room erupted in chaos as leaders argued over how to respond to this new threat. Jenkins stood, his voice cutting through the din. I have a proposal, he said, drawing all eyes to him. I'll lead a small team to infiltrate the rogue Romulan faction. We'll neutralize the threat from within. Diana stepped forward, her earlier doubts pushed aside by the urgency of the situation. I'll go with you. My knowledge of Romulan tactics will be invaluable. Dr. Harris joined them, her expression determined. And I'll be there to monitor your condition, Captain. We don't know how your transformation will progress, especially under stress. Admiral Zhao nodded gravely. Very well. We'll outfit the USS Horizon with the best stealth technology our alliance can provide. This mission is our best hope of resolving this crisis without igniting a full-scale war. As preparations for the covert operation began, Jenkins and Diana found a moment alone. They stood in the observation lounge, the stars streaking by as the ship prepared for its dangerous mission. Jenkins turned to Diana, his eyes searching hers. I know this isn't easy for you, he said softly. My condition, this mission, there's so much uncertainty. Diana met his gaze, her hand reaching out to touch his face. Uncertainty has always been part of our lives, Jenkins. Whatever happens, whatever you become, we'll face it together. As they embraced, the ship's alert system chimed, signaling the final preparations for their departure. The USS Horizon, now a hybrid of technologies from across the Alliance, prepared to venture into the heart of hostile territory. Jenkins, Diana, and their hand-picked team stood ready on the bridge, acutely aware of the challenges that lay ahead. The ship slipped into warp, vanishing from the Allied fleet's sensors. Their mission had begun, carrying with it the hopes of a fragile peace and the fate of countless liberated Borg drones. As they raced toward Romulan space, Jenkins felt a strange tingling in his body, a sign that his transformation was just the beginning. Whatever changes awaited him, he knew that the true test lay in the dangerous mission ahead. Whatever changes awaited him, he knew that the true test lay in the dangerous mission before them. As the USS Horizon slipped silently through Romulan space, Jenkins felt a strange tingling sensation coursing through his body. He closed his eyes, focusing on the unfamiliar feeling. Suddenly, his awareness expanded, and he gasped as a flood of emotions washed over him. "Captain?" Diana's concerned voice cut through the cacophony of sensations. Jenkins opened his eyes, blinking rapidly. I can feel them," he whispered, his voice filled with awe. "The crew, the Romulans on nearby ships. I can sense their emotions." Dr. Harris immediately scanned him with her tricorder. "Fascinating," she murmured. "Your brain activity has spiked dramatically. It seems your empathic abilities have manifested." As they approached the rogue faction's base, Jenkins's newfound ability proved invaluable. He guided the team through the complex maze of Romulan patrols, sensing the alertness and suspicion of the guards long before they came into view. "There," Jenkins whispered, pointing to a small, unassuming entrance on the compound's eastern side. "I sense minimal activity there. It's our best chance to get in undetected." The team moved swiftly, their footsteps silent on the rocky terrain. As they entered the facility, the acrid smell of antiseptic and fear assaulted their senses. Jenkins stumbled, overwhelmed by the waves of pain and terror emanating from nearby. "This way," he gasped, leading them down a dimly lit corridor. They emerged into a large chamber filled with rows of examination tables. On each table lay a former Borg drone, their bodies connected to a maze of wires and tubes. The sight of the captured drones undergoing painful experiments triggered something primal in Jenkins. His body tensed, and he felt a surge of protective rage course through him. Without warning, his pheromone production spiked, flooding the room with an invisible cloud of chemicals. The effect was immediate. The docile drones on the tables began to stir, their eyes focusing as if awakening from a long sleep. Nearby Romulan guards staggered, their expressions confused and disoriented. "Now's our chance," Diana hissed, moving to free the nearest drone. As chaos erupted around them, Jenkins and Diana led the team deeper into the compound. With each passing moment, Jenkins felt his body changing. His skin began to tingle, and he noticed a faint glow emanating from his hands. Dr. Harris grabbed his arm, her face etched with concern. "Captain, your body temperature is rising rapidly. These changes, they're accelerating. We need to complete this mission quickly." Jenkins nodded, pushing aside the discomfort. "We press on," he said firmly. They fought their way through the compound, freeing more ex-Borg prisoners as they went. Jenkins' newly evolved abilities allowed him to anticipate enemy movements, guiding the team with uncanny precision. As they approached the central control room, a group of elite Romulan guards blocked their path. Jenkins locked eyes with Diana, and without a word they moved in perfect synchronization. Diana's agility complemented Jenkins' raw power, their movements fluid and deadly. In the heat of battle, Jenkins felt a searing pain in his head. Suddenly, he found himself projecting his thoughts directly into the minds of his teammates. "Left flank, 2 guards," he communicated silently. "Diana, watch your 6. The team's coordination became flawless, but each use of this new ability sent waves of agony through Jenkins' body. Dr. Harris watched in alarm as his skin began to glow more intensely, his veins visible beneath the luminescent surface. Finally, they breached the central control room. Commander Karras, the leader of the rogue faction, stood before them, his face contorted with rage. "You dare to interfere with our plans?" he snarled. Jenkins stepped forward, his body radiating an otherworldly light. "Your plans end here, Commander," he said, his voice resonating with an alien timbre. As Karras lunged forward, Jenkins connected to the base's computer system. His mind raced through data streams, uncovering the full scope of the Romulan plot. With horror, he realized the scale of the planned attack on the rehabilitation centers. In a high-stakes endeavor, Jenkins channeled his evolved physiology into the computer network. A massive wave of pacifying pheromones surged through the base's communication systems, spreading throughout the compound. The effect was instantaneous. Throughout the facility, Romulan soldiers lowered their weapons, their eyes glazed. The remaining captive drones broke free from their restraints, no longer held in check by their captors. But the effort proved too much for Jenkins' rapidly changing body. He collapsed to the ground, his form racked with violent convulsions. Diana rushed to his side, cradling his head as Dr. Harris frantically scanned him with her medical tricorder. His DNA, it's destabilizing, Dr. Harris said, her voice tight with fear. The human and Romulan genetic structures are fighting each other. If we don't find a way to stabilize them soon... She didn't need to finish the sentence. Diana looked down at Jenkins, his skin now pulsing with an eerie light, his features contorted in pain. She made a decision. There might be someone who can help, Diana said, her voice filled with willpower. My old mentor, Dr. Talira. She's a brilliant geneticist who went into hiding after opposing the Empire's policies. If anyone can save him, it's her. As Diana spoke, an urgent communication came through from the USS Horizon. A massive Romulan fleet is approaching your position, the ship's tactical officer reported. ETA, 5 minutes. You need to evacuate immediately. Diana looked at Dr. Harris, then down at the unconscious form of Jenkins. Time was running out, and they faced an impossible choice. Escape with their hard-won intelligence, save the free drones, or risk everything to find a cure for Jenkins' condition. As alarms blared throughout the compound and the distant rumble of approaching ships filled the air, Diana knew that their next decision would determine not just Jenkins' fate, but potentially the future of the entire quadrant. Quadrant. Diana's heart raced as she made her decision. She looked at Dr. Harris, her voice filled with urgency. We need to save Jenkins and the drones. Can we beam them aboard the Horizon? Before Dr. Harris could respond, the deck beneath their feet shuddered violently. The USS Horizon had arrived, swooping in low over the compound. Its weapons blazed, laying down suppressing fire against the incoming Romulan ships. This is Captain Reeves, a familiar voice crackled over their communicators. We're here to extract you. Stand by for emergency transport. The air around them shimmered as the transporter beam took hold. In an instant, they materialized on the Horizon's bridge. Jenkins's unconscious form sprawled on the deck between them. Dr. Harris immediately called for a medical team. Status report, Diana demanded, helping to lift Jenkins onto a stretcher. Captain Reeves's face was grim as he maneuvered the ship through a hail of disruptor fire. We've beamed aboard all the liberated drones, but the Romulan fleet is closing fast. We're outnumbered and outgunned. As if to emphasize his point, the ship rocked violently under another barrage. Sparks flew from a nearby console, and the acrid smell of burning circuitry filled the air. Engineering reports heavy damage to the warp drive, the tactical officer shouted over the din of battle alerts. We can't take much more of this, Captain. Diana's mind raced. They needed a safe haven, somewhere to tend to Jenkins and regroup. Suddenly, a memory surfaced, a name she hadn't thought of in years. I know where we can go, she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. Set a course for the neutral zone. Coordinates 227 Mark 359. Captain Reeves hesitated for a split second before nodding. You heard the ambassador. Helm, maximum impulse. The Horizon banked hard, its hull groaning under the strain as it dove between two approaching Romulan warbirds. Disruptor beams lanced past them, missing by mere meters. In the medical bay, Dr. Harris worked feverishly over Jenkins' convulsing form. His skin pulsed with an eerie, otherworldly light, and the biobed's sensors were going haywire. His DNA is unraveling at the molecular level, Dr. Harris muttered, her hands flying over the medical controls. I've never seen anything like this. Diana stood nearby, her eyes fixed on Jenkins' face. Hold on, she whispered. We're getting you help. The ship shuddered again, and the lights flickered ominously. Captain Reeves's voice came over the intercom. "We've crossed into the neutral zone. Diana, we need those coordinates now." Diana leaned over the nearest comm panel. "There's a small M-class planet in Sector 9. It's uninhabited officially, but I know someone there who might be able to help Jenkins." As she spoke, the main view screen showed a lush, green world growing larger. The pursuing Romulan ships hesitated at the edge of the neutral zone, unwilling to risk an interstellar incident by following. "We're not out of danger yet," Reeves warned. "Our warp core is on the verge of a breach. We need to set down for repairs." The Horizon entered the planet's atmosphere, its hull glowing red-hot from the friction. Trees rushed up to meet them as Reeves fought for control, aiming for a clearing barely large enough to accommodate the ship. With a bone-jarring impact, the Horizon plowed into the forest floor, carving a deep furrow through the alien vegetation before finally coming to rest. Silence fell over the ship, broken only by the hiss of ruptured conduits and the distant crackle of small fires. In the medical bay, Diana helped Dr. Harris secure Jenkins for transport. "We need to move fast," Diana said, her voice tight with worry. "My contact isn't far from here, but we don't know how much time Jenkins has left." As they prepared to disembark, Captain Reeves approached, his uniform singed and torn. "I'm coming with you," he said firmly. "Whatever's happening to Jenkins, it's clear now that he's vital to the safety of the entire quadrant. We need him alive." Diana nodded, grateful for the support. Together, they carried Jenkins' stretcher down the Horizon's ramp and into the alien forest. The air was thick with the scent of unfamiliar blossoms and the rich, loamy smell of undisturbed soil. "This way," Diana said, leading them along a barely visible path. "My mentor, Dr. Talira, has a hidden laboratory not far from here. If anyone can help Jenkins, it's her." As they moved deeper into the forest, the sounds of the damaged ship faded behind them. Strange bird-like creatures called from the canopy above, and unseen animals rustled in the underbrush. Jenkins' breathing grew more labored with each step, his skin now glowing so brightly it was visible even in the dappled sunlight. After what felt like hours but was likely only minutes, they emerged into a small clearing. At its center stood a structure that seemed to grow organically from the surrounding trees, a perfect blend of nature and advanced technology. Diana approached a seemingly blank wall and pressed her hand against it. A hidden door slid open, revealing a state-of-the-art laboratory within. "Talira!" Diana called out. "I need your help!" From the depths of the lab, a tall, elderly Romulan woman emerged. Her eyes widened as she took in the scene before her. The injured Jenkins, the exhausted humans, and Diana, her former student, looking more desperate than she'd ever seen her. "What have you brought me, child?" Talira asked, her voice a mix of concern and curiosity. Before Diana could answer, a distant explosion rocked the forest. Captain Reeves's communicator crackled to life. "Sir, Romulan ships have entered the atmosphere. They're on an intercept course." Talira's expression hardened. "Quickly," she said, gesturing toward an examination table. "Bring him inside. We have much to do and very little time." As they rushed Jenkins into the lab, the sound of disruptor fire echoed through the trees. The race to save Jenkins, and perhaps the future of the entire quadrant, had begun in earnest.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.